Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving into a topic that I think really hits close to home for anyone who's ever tried to sell a service, especially if you're in the contracting world, right? We're kind of at those really frustrating responses like, let me think about it.
Or, I need to get other quotes.
Exactly. The ones that can just make a promising deal sort of evaporate. So our deep dive today is looking at a really practical article. It focuses on how contractors, specifically, can overcome these objections and, well, close faster.
Right.
Our mission here is basically to pull out the core strategies, the things that help you build, undeniable trust and value. So you can turn those hesitant prospects into committed clients, maybe even right there on the first visit.
Yeah, which is the ideal scenario.
Think of it like a shortcut, maybe, to mastering that initial client interaction.
And it's actually fascinating, how universal these challenges feel, even though the source we looked at really zeroes in on contractors. It brings up a pretty critical question for you listening right now. How much time, how much effort, and frankly, how much potential revenue are you leaving on the table when a good lead just vanishes after that first meeting?
Yeah, that first handshake.
In our research, it actually showed some compelling data. We're talking thousands of contractors here. And it shows that the hidden costs, things like poor first impressions or just vague next steps, they really add up. We're talking potentially thousands in lost revenue every single month.
Wow.
It's not just the time you spent driving out there, It's the actual jobs you could have landed.
Right, the opportunity cost. So, okay, that classic line, we need to think about it. Our sources consistently highlighted that as a major stumbling block.
It's huge.
And it's not just them being polite, trying to brush you off. It's actually a signal.
What kind of signal?
Well, what our deep dive revealed is that it usually means you haven't quite cemented the trust, or maybe you haven't clarified the value enough for them to feel, safe saying yes right then and there.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. So it opens the door for them to
call the next guy. And you lose control. You lose that initial momentum, which is just so critical in these situations.
Right, momentum is key.
But, the good news is the solution isn't some kind of magic word or like a high-pressure sales tactic.
No, definitely not.
It's more about having a system, an approach that proactively builds that trust, builds that value, makes those objections almost irrelevant, or at least much easier to handle.
So you're controlling the narrative.
Exactly. You control the narrative, you justify your price, and you make the homeowner actually want to commit right there. We can call it maybe a client commitment framework.
I like that, client commitment framework. And if we zoom out a bit, this framework, it really emphasizes that the trust building, it has to start before you even shake their hand.
Before the meeting.
Yeah. The whole goal is to create a situation where they almost feel it's unnecessary to even look anywhere else.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Well, one powerful principle we found mentioned again and again was about punctuality. Let's call it the on-time advantage.
Okay. Seems basic, but important.
It is, but the idea is powerful. You build anticipation, you set professional expectations right away, and you prove your reliability from minute one.
Ah, I see.
When you show up exactly when you said you would, you've already won a pretty big part of the battle, psychologically.
Because you're instantly different.
Exactly. You've shown you're not like the flaky contractor stereotype they might be worried about. And that strengthens your value proposition immensely, even if your price isn't rock bottom.
Right, because reliability has huge value. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, like super practical. The sources gave us some specific plays for when objections do pop up. So first, how do you figure out their real hesitation? Like, what's their underlying why?
Yeah, getting past the surface level.
Right, so when they say, we need to think about it, the advice is, don't just nod and back away. You pivot. You ask something like, I completely understand, just so I can make sure I've covered absolutely everything.
Yeah.
What specifically do you need to think about? Is it maybe the timeline or the materials we discussed, or perhaps something else entirely?
That is such a great question. It's direct but respectful.
Yeah.
And it's so effective, isn't it? Because it gently but firmly encourages them to actually articulate the real sticking point.
Right, you're not being pushy.
No, you're positioning yourself as like a helpful advisor, helping them make an informed decision. It turns that vague dismissal into a real conversation about the actual issue.
Exactly. Okay, so what about the other big one? I need other quotes. That one sends you straight into a price war, usually.
Yeah. The race to the bottom.
So the insight here was interesting. It's basically embrace it. Don't fight it.
Oh, How so?
You can say something like, I absolutely encourage you to get other quotes. In fact, I want you to, but just let me quickly show you what to look out for in those other bids.
Framing it.
Things that might look cheaper up front, but could actually end up costing you a lot more down the road. You're guiding their comparison.
That's brilliant. You're not dismissing their need to compare. You're educating them on how to compare intelligently.
Right.
You shift the focus from just price to overall value and potential risks. It reinforces your expertise, makes you look like you have their best interest at heart.
It elevates you above just being another quote.
Definitely. It builds trust by empowering them, not just by trying to undersell everyone else.
Okay, so you've maybe uncovered the real hesitation. What about preventing that awful follow-up limbo, that I'll get back to you black hole where deals just disappear?
Yeah, the dreaded void.
What did the sources say about controlling that next step? Because that seems crucial.
Absolutely crucial. The key takeaway was never, ever leave an appointment without a clear scheduled next step that's on both your calendars.
Okay, like specifically scheduling the follow-up.
Exactly. For instance, you could say, okay, based on everything we talked about, how about I give you a quick call on, say, Thursday at 2 p.m.? That should give you time to look things over, and I can answer any other questions that pop up.
Put it right in the diary.
Put it right in the diary, yours and theirs. This simple action, it sets the expectation, it shows you're organized, professional.
And it keeps the ball in your court.
Precisely. You maintain control of the process. You're not sitting there waiting passively. You're actively leading them towards a decision.
That feels like such a small shift, but the impact seems huge. No more chasing ghosts.
It really is huge. You essentially close off that black hole. You signal professionalism, commitment, and you guide the client forward instead of just hoping they remember to call you back.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. Finally, the sources really hammered home the point about reinforcing value over just the price tag.
Yes, this is a big theme.
How do you actually do that when you're presenting your solution or your bid?
Well, the recommendation was often to use some kind of structured client alignment document, something more involved than just a list of prices.
Okay, not just a standard quote.
Right. Think of it less as a quote and more as like a guided conversation on paper. It actually prompts the client to articulate their specific problem or their vision, maybe in writing.
Into getting them involved.
Yeah, guiding them through key questions about their expectations, what success looks like to them. When they actively participate in defining the scope like that,
They have more buy-in.
exactly, it ensures you're both perfectly aligned from the start, and it builds that buy-in immediately.
That's a really interesting approach. So you're not just handing them a number.
Yeah.
You're kind of co-creating the definition of success.
That's a great way to put it. And when you present your solution using a tool like this, you're not just justifying a price for a project. You're explaining how your process...
Like the punctuality we talked about.
Exactly, like the punctuality, the clear communication you offer, the organized workflow, how all that prevents the headaches and the fears they might have about hiring a contractor.
So you're selling the absence of problems.
You got it. You're selling peace of mind. You're selling predictable outcomes, not just a service or a number. It's demonstrating how your method actually solves their deeper anxieties about the project.
Okay, so pulling this all together then, what does it mean for you, the listener? That, think about it, objection, the need for other quotes. Our deep dive really shows they're just symptoms, right?
Mm-hmm. Symptoms of something deeper.
Symptoms of maybe unresolved trust or unclear value. And by putting these kinds of systematic approaches into place, like this client commitment framework we discussed,
You build that trust proactively.
you build the trust, you clarify the value up front, and you stand a much, much better chance of turning those hesitant prospects into genuinely committed clients.
Yeah, transforming that initial meeting from like a gamble into something much more predictable, a predictable win.
Okay, so that leads us to the final thought.
Right. So this raises, I think, an important question for you to think about. Even if you're not in contracting, where else in your own life or your work are you maybe leaving control of the next step entirely up to chance?
Interesting question.
What hidden costs might you be incurring right now? Whether it's in sales, sure, but also maybe in projects, collaborations, even personal relationships.
Yeah.
By not proactively building that solid foundation of trust and making the value crystal clear in your own interactions, how much is that really costing you?